12-year-old Imani Davis stood nervously at Gate 41, clutching her boarding pass with both hands. It was her first time flying alone. Her heart fluttered between excitement and fear. She wore her favorite denim jacket, her hair tied in two, neat puffs like her mom always did before important events. Her suitcase, a bright purple roller bag with a unicorn tag, rested beside her feet. She'd spent the last week visiting her aunt in Atlanta. Now it was time to return home to New York. The gate agent had scanned her ticket. Everything was fine. All she had to do was board. But as Imani walked through the jet bridge and stepped onto the plane, the atmosphere suddenly changed. A tall, slim white woman with tightly pulled back hair and a stiff expression, the lead flight attendant, stood just past the entrance. Her eyes narrowed as soon as she saw Imani. "Excuse me?" the attendant said sharply, holding out her hand. Imani froze. "Yes? Where are you going, sweetheart?" "My seat," Imani replied politely, offering her boarding pass. The woman glanced at it, barely. Then her face hardened. "No," she said flatly. "This isn't right. There must be a mistake." Imani blinked, confused. "But they already scanned it at the gate." "Don't lie," the woman snapped. "This ticket says Seat 2C. That's first class. You're not supposed to be there." Imani's hands trembled as she held the paper out again. "I didn't lie. My mom booked it for me." The flight attendant didn't even look at her. She snatched the ticket from Imani's hand with a frustrated sigh and ripped it in half. Passengers in nearby rows looked up. Imani gasped, her voice barely a whisper. "Why would you do that?" "You're clearly in the wrong place," the woman said, her tone ice cold. "Now go wait outside while we call someone from the gate to sort this out." Imani's breath caught in her throat. She stood motionless, stunned. She'd done everything right. She followed the signs. She passed security. She waited in line. She scanned her ticket. And now, she was being treated like she didn't belong. Like she was a problem that needed removing. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. "Not yet. Please," she said quietly. "I just want to go home." The flight attendant gave a dismissive wave. "This isn't daycare. Go wait off the plane until someone comes for you." Imani turned slowly and began walking back down the jet bridge, her hands empty now, her ticket destroyed. Back at the gate, the agent looked confused. "Why are you back?" Imani's voice cracked. "She tore up my ticket." The agent's face changed instantly. "What?" Imani pointed toward the plane. "She said I didn't belong in first class, but that's what's on the ticket. My mom booked it." The agent frowned, checking her computer. "You're absolutely correct. Seat 2C, confirmed." Then she paused. Her eyes widened slightly. "Wait, what's your mom's name again?" "Naomi Davis." The gate agent blinked, and, slowly, a stunned expression spread across her face. She turned toward the cabin entrance, picked up the phone, and made a quiet call. Imani didn't understand what was happening, but inside that plane, the flight attendant who had torn up her ticket was about to find out the one thing she never bothered to ask, who Naomi Davis really was, and when the truth landed, so would consequences. Back at Gate 41, Imani stood quietly beside the check-in counter. Her purple suitcase leaned against her leg, and her eyes stayed locked on the torn halves of her boarding pass lying on the desk. The gate agent, a woman in her early 30s named Kayla, kept glancing between Imani and the screen in front of her, clearly unsettled. She picked up the phone again, this time dialing with more urgency. "Hi, this is Gate 41, she said, lowering her voice. "I need to speak with the cabin supervisor immediately." "Yes, it's regarding a priority passenger. First class. The flight attendant just denied boarding and destroyed the child's ticket. Yes, the name is Imani Davis." Pause. Then Kayla added, her voice even lower now, "She's Naomi Davis's daughter." There was a moment of stunned silence on the other end of the call. Kayla nodded once, hung up, and turned to Imani with a reassuring smile that didn't quite hide the tension behind her eyes. "Honey," she said gently, "you stay right here, okay? Someone very important is on their way." Imani didn't know what that meant, but she nodded. Her mom had always taught her to stay calm under pressure. Still, her hands wouldn't stop shaking, and her chest felt tight. Just then, from the corner of the terminal, a man in a tailored, black suit walked briskly toward the gate. His earpiece glinted in the light and a badge hung at his side. Behind him, two uniformed airline officials followed close behind. One of them carried a sleek leather folder, the kind that never came out unless someone at the very top had just been notified. Imani watched them approach, uncertain. Kayla stood, up straighter. "Here they come," the suited man leaned in and spoke softly. "We've already briefed corporate. Miss Davis's mother is en route to the terminal, but she gave us one instruction. Get her daughter back on that plane, immediately." Imani blinked. "My mom is coming here?" Kayla smiled, this time with more confidence. "Yes, sweetheart. And let's just say, she's not coming as a passenger today." Back on the plane, the lead flight attendant, Ms. Porter, was resetting her cart in the galley, muttering under her breath. "Unbelievable," she snapped to a colleague. "First they let these kids wander into first class like it's a school bus. Then they act like I'm the problem for enforcing order." The younger flight attendant beside her looked uncomfortable. "She had a ticket, though. It was confirmed." "She had an attitude," Ms. Porter hissed. "I don't care what seat was printed, she clearly didn't belong there, probably using someone else's points or a promo. I was protecting the, airline's image." Suddenly, the cockpit door clicked open, and the pilot himself stepped out. Behind him, the man in the black suit and the two airline officials, and they weren't smiling. "Ms. Porter," one of the men began, his tone razor-sharp, "we need to speak with you now." She blinked, surprised. "What is this about?" "The passenger you just removed?" That was Imani Davis. Silence. "And her mother," the man continued, "is Naomi Davis, the CEO of Sky Connect Airlines, the woman who signs your paycheck." Color drained from Ms. Porter's face. "She's on her way to this gate right now," the man added coldly. "And believe me, this isn't going to be handled with an apology and a smile." Ms. Porter opened her mouth, but no words came out. Somewhere in the back of her mind, she realized her career might have just ended in 2.5 seconds, because she'd judged a girl by her skin, by her age, by her quietness, and not once thought to ask who she was. Meanwhile, back in the terminal, Imani stood straighter as a sleek black SUV pulled up to the glass doors of the gate, and out stepped her mother, Naomi Davis, radiating power in a tailored navy suit and heels that clicked with authority. She wasn't here for a flight. She was here for justice. And the sky? It was about to get a whole lot stormier for the woman who thought she could tear up a child's worth with a single rip. The glass doors slid open with a quiet swoosh, but the energy that followed wasn't quiet at all. Naomi Davis stepped into the terminal with the calm intensity of a storm you knew better than to challenge. Passengers instinctively moved aside. Her presence wasn't loud. She didn't need to raise her voice. She was the voice, dark navy blazer. Gold pin with the Sky Connect insignia, a black leather folder in one hand, and a look on her face that said someone was about to regret everything. Imani saw her first. "Mom!" she called, a hint of relief breaking through the tension in her. Naomi's entire expression shifted. Her jaw softened, her eyes warmed as she crossed the space quickly and wrapped her daughter in a tight hug. "I'm so sorry, baby," she whispered. "You should have never gone through that. Not on my airline." Imani pulled back, voice small. "She tore up my ticket. Said I didn't belong." Naomi inhaled slowly, jaw clenched now. She'll wish she never touched it. Behind her, the airline officials trailed in respectfully. The man in the black suit leaned toward Naomi and said, The flight attendant has been identified and removed from duty pending internal review. The pilot is standing by to speak with you. Would you like to board the aircraft? Naomi nodded. Yes, but I won't be quiet about this, and neither should you. Inside the plane, the atmosphere had shifted. First-class passengers murmured, nervously, most having caught at least a piece of the confrontation. A few had pulled out phones. One had even discreetly recorded the moment Ms. Porter tore the ticket and raised her voice. Now, that same flight attendant stood near the back, galley, arms crossed, trying to maintain composure, but clearly rattled. A chime signaled the cabin door opening. Then, footsteps, confident, unhurried. And into the aisle stepped Naomi Davis, flanked by two airline executives and the pilot himself. Whispers erupted across the rows. That's her. The CEO? She's here for the kid. Naomi didn't look at the passengers. She didn't need to. Her eyes were locked on one person, Ms. Porter. Their eyes met. Naomi didn't shout. She didn't curse. She simply said, "You tore up my daughter's ticket. You publicly humiliated a 12-year-old. And you assumed, without question, that she didn't deserve to sit in first class." Ms. Porter swallowed hard. I didn't know who she was. That's exactly the problem, Naomi cut in. You shouldn't have to know someone's name or wealth to treat them with respect. The entire cabin went silent. Naomi stepped closer, speaking low but with steel in her voice. Imani belongs in that seat because she paid for it. But even if she hadn't, your job was to protect her, not humiliate her. You embarrassed my child in front of strangers. And now, you're the one who doesn't belong on this plane. The attendant's composure cracked. I didn't mean... Naomi raised a hand. Save it. You'll have time to explain yourself in your termination hearing. She turned to the passengers nearby and offered a tight, professional nod. I apologize for the disruption. Sky Connect will be reviewing training procedures across our national fleet. What happened today is unacceptable, and it ends now. A smattering of applause broke out. Not loud, but solid, supportive. Naomi stepped aside, allowing the executives to escort Ms. Porter off the plane. Then she walked to seat 2C, gently guiding Imani down the aisle. When her daughter sat down, Naomi leaned down, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "No one ever gets to tell you where you don't belong. Not in this life, not in my skies." Imani looked up at her mother, eyes bright, smile returning, and Naomi stood tall in the aisle, watching the doors close behind the woman who thought she could tear down a child. With nothing more than paper, she tore the ticket. But this time, the damage was her own. The cabin doors sealed with a soft hiss. The engines rumbled quietly beneath the fuselage. Passengers were finally settling into their seats, but not a soul had forgotten what just happened. Imani sat quietly in Seat 2C, the one she was always meant to occupy. Her purple carry-on sat neatly beneath her feet. Her hands, which had trembled just 20 minutes earlier, now rested calmly in her lap. She glanced out the window. The sky was beginning to tint gold with the fading light of the afternoon, and yet the most powerful shift hadn't happened outside. It had happened right here, in this cabin, in front of dozens of strangers who had witnessed a moment of truth. Naomi Davis stood just beside her daughter's seat, still poised, still watching. Her presence lingered like a shield, unspoken but undeniable. The flight attendant assigned to this section, a young Latina woman named Carla, approached gently. "Miss Davis," she said quietly, addressing Naomi with respect. Would you like to sit beside your daughter for takeoff?" Naomi gave a nod of appreciation. "Thank you, Carla. That would be lovely." The woman across the aisle, an older gentleman who had been watching everything, spoke up. "Take my seat," he offered. 2D. I'd be honored." Naomi's expression softened. "That's very kind of you, sir." He gave her a respectful nod, and switched places without hesitation. As Naomi settled beside Imani, she reached over and took her hand. "You okay now?" she asked gently. Imani nodded. "I think I'm more than okay." There was a silence between them, but it wasn't heavy. It was proud. It was healing. It was the silence of someone who had been told they didn't belong, and answered that lie with quiet truth and unshakable presence. Meanwhile, back on the ground, Ms. Porter sat stiffly in the crew briefing room, surrounded by silence. No uniform, no badge, no authority. The HR officer placed a formal letter in front of her, company letterhead, clearly stamped. This letter serves as notice of suspension pending investigation. She didn't even finish reading it. Her ears buzzed with regret, her thoughts racing with disbelief. It had started so quickly. She saw a young black girl in first class. She assumed. She acted. She humiliated. And now, she was no longer on the flight, no longer on the team, no longer protected by the title she once thought gave her power. Her silence in that chair was louder than any outburst she'd made on the plane. Back. In the sky, the aircraft began its smooth ascent. The cabin lights dimmed. The outside world shrank below, distant and irrelevant. Imani leaned her head against her mother's shoulder and whispered, "You came fast." Naomi smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her daughter's forehead. "I'll always show up for you, Imani. No one messes with you, not while I'm on this earth." Imani looked down at the new boarding pass the crew had reprinted for her. Seat 2C, Imani Davis, Sky Connect. Elite, she tucked it into her journal and smiled to herself. She wasn't elite because of the airline. She was elite because she had dignity, because she had a mother who led with power and purpose, because she had held her head high when someone tried to tear her down. As the plane leveled out above the clouds, the captain's voice filled the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're cruising at 30,000 feet. We thank you for flying Sky Connect, and we promise every passenger has a seat here." Imani closed her eyes and let out a long, peaceful breath. She knew now. There are people in this world who will try to rip your worth in half. But if you stay calm, if you stay true, and if someone has your back, no one, not even in first class, can take your place. The cabin had quieted. Dinner trays clinked gently. The hum of the engine softened into background music as the plane glided above the clouds. But inside Seat 2C, Imani Davis wasn't just enjoying a flight. She was reclaiming something that no boarding pass could ever guarantee: her place. Across the aisle, a woman in pearls leaned forward and whispered, "Your daughter handled herself with such grace. Most adults wouldn't have stayed so composed." Naomi looked over, her voice calm but strong. "That's because she knows who she is, and I've taught her never to let anyone shrink her down." Imani smiled faintly. She hadn't said much since takeoff, but she didn't need to. Her silence now wasn't fear. It was power. The kind of quiet confidence that came when you knew the world just saw you survive something unjust and rise from it. The pilot came over the intercom again. "Ladies and gentlemen, as we continue our journey, we'd like to acknowledge that every individual on board deserves to be here. From the cockpit to the cabin, we stand for respect and equality, no matter your background, your age, or the color of your skin." There was a beat of stillness. Then, subtle but meaningful, passengers across the first-class section began to clap. It wasn't loud, it wasn't forced. It was real, and it was for Imani. Naomi glanced over at her daughter. "That sound?" she whispered. "It's not applause, it's recognition." Down the aisle, one of the new flight attendants approached, crouching gently beside Imani's seat. "I just wanted to say," she said with a kind smile, "you've reminded all of us why we do this job. Not for titles or power, but for people. We're truly honored to have you on board." Imani smiled, eyes wide. Thank you. The attendant reached into her pocket and handed Imani a small envelope. This is from our team. A little something to say we're sorry, and that we'll do better. Inside the envelope, a lifetime Sky Connect Elite card with Imani's name engraved on it. Not a gift, a gesture. Because sometimes, the real upgrade isn't the seat, it's the respect that comes with it. Meanwhile, on the ground, the story had already begun to spread. A video clip, taken discreetly by a passenger during the confrontation, was going viral. In it, Ms. Porter's voice could be heard saying, "You clearly don't belong in first class," followed by the moment Imani Davis stepped onto the plane and responded, "Then I'll remind you who owns it." The internet lit up. Seat 2C. Fly with dignity, CEO Justice. Within hours, news outlets were covering it. Within days, other passengers began sharing their stories of silent profiling, quiet cruelty, and the moments they wished they'd spoken up. But now, they were finding their voices, and Imani had become the quiet spark behind it all. As the plane began its descent, Naomi leaned in. "You know this story won't stop here, right?" Imani nodded. "I don't want it to." "Good," Naomi said. "Because when people try to erase you, your job is to write it bigger, with poise, with pride, with power." They landed to a calm evening sky. At the terminal, a small crowd had gathered. Not reporters, just staff, employees, from Sky Connect HQ, ground crew, managers. Some had flowers, others had tears. They weren't there to impress the CEO. They were there to welcome her daughter, the girl who reminded an entire company why humanity must always fly first class. Imani stepped off the plane. She looked ahead, not up, not down, forward. And, as the cool night air brushed her cheeks, she knew this story would follow her forever. But so would her voice, so would her worth, and so would this truth. You don't need permission to belong. You only need the courage to stay seated when someone else tries to stand over you. The airport lounge was calm, but the air around, Naomi and Imani Davis buzzed with something electric, a quiet storm of awareness that had begun to ripple far beyond the terminal walls. As they sat together in a private waiting area, Imani flipped through the trending news on her phone. Her name was there, her story was there, but even more powerful than the headlines were the thousands of comments from all over the world. "This happened to my daughter, too. Thank you for standing up. As a flight attendant, I'm ashamed this happened, but I'm inspired by how it was handled. Seat 2C belongs to every kid who was told they weren't enough. We see you, Imani." Naomi watched quietly as her daughter scrolled. She didn't interrupt. She could see the fire behind Imani's eyes, not anger, but purpose. The experience hadn't broken her. It had awakened her. Imani looked up. "Why do people get to decide who belongs?" she asked softly. "Why do they look at someone and think they know everything about them?" Naomi exhaled slowly. "Because the world has been trained to judge quickly. But we're here to slow it down and speak up when those judgments cause harm." Imani nodded. "It's just, she didn't even ask me my name. She saw me and assumed I didn't belong. I didn't even feel like a person to her." Naomi reached over and squeezed her daughter's hand. "But you made her see you. And more importantly, you made everyone else see you too." A few hours later, Naomi was invited to join a live stream with a panel of aviation leaders, diversity, advocates, and national media. She offered to decline, but Imani insisted. "No, Mom, you have to do it. They'll listen to you." Naomi smirked. "They're already listening to you, sweetheart, but I'll go." On the panel, Naomi didn't just speak as a CEO, she spoke as a mother, a black woman, and someone who had watched her child be judged and dismissed. This isn't about one flight. It's about the systems that give people the confidence to strip others of dignity without hesitation. We must create policies, but more than that, We need to create culture change, from the top down, from the cockpit to the cabin. The panel host nodded solemnly. And what would you say to the woman who tore up your daughter's ticket? Naomi paused, then replied, I'd say this. You didn't just tear a piece of paper. You tore trust. But in doing so, you handed my daughter a microphone, and she's using it better than most adults ever could. Meanwhile, across cities and continents, schools were holding assemblies about unconscious bias. Airlines were rewriting training manuals. Parents were sitting down with their children and asking, has anything like this ever happened to you? And stories poured in. A young boy denied entry into a private school interview because of his hoodie, now accepted with an apology. A woman overlooked at a board meeting until she spoke up and turned out to be the founder of the company. A family removed from a hotel lobby for loitering, only to return the next day with proof of ownership. Each story ended the same way. I held my seat. That night, back home in New York, Imani sat at her desk, laptop open, typing the first few lines of something new, a blog, a journal, maybe one day, a book. The title? Seat 2C, Stories from the Other Side of Assumptions. Naomi peeked through the doorway, smiling. You're writing again? Imani grinned. I think there's more to say. Naomi walked in and kissed her forehead. There always is. And as the lights dimmed in the Davis home, the world outside stayed wide awake, still reading, still sharing, still learning, because one little girl got her seat torn away. And instead of walking off the plane quietly, she chose to fly louder than ever. By the end of the week, the story of Seat 2C wasn't just viral, it was transformational. What started as a humiliating moment for a 12-year-old girl had become a mirror for millions, not just for airline passengers, not just for young black girls, but for anyone who had ever been looked at and wrongly labeled. Imani's blog, launched just days earlier, had reached over 500,000 views. Teachers were printing out her posts and reading them aloud in classrooms. HR directors were using her story in company trainings. Airline competitors were quietly reviewing their own internal bias policies, just in case, and in a brightly lit boardroom at Sky Connect headquarters, Naomi Davis sat at the head of a long mahogany table, surrounded by executives, PR strategists, and diversity officers. This isn't a PR crisis, she said, looking each of them in the eye. This is a chance to lead from the front, and I don't want empty words, I want action. A younger VP leaned forward cautiously. What kind of action exactly? Naomi didn't miss a beat. Mandatory anti-bias training, a new customer conduct policy clearly displayed at every gate, and a seat-naming initiative on all new aircraft, a first-class row reserved in honor of civil rights leaders and barrier breakers. I want children like Imani to walk onto a plane and feel seen before they speak. Silence. Then applause. Not polite, genuine. Because it wasn't just smart business, it was the right thing to do. That evening, Imani received a package on her doorstep. Inside, a letter from a young girl named Zoe in Chicago. Dear Imani, today I stood up to a teacher who always skips me in class. I raised my hand. I said, I have a seat too. And for the first time, he listened. Thank you for being brave first. Love, Zoe, age 11. Imani's throat tightened as she folded the letter and tucked it into her growing keepsake box, now filled with printed emails, handwritten notes, and drawings from kids who had turned her story into their own starting line. Naomi watched from the hallway. You're changing things, you know, she said gently. Imani looked up. It still feels weird, like this started with something bad, something I wish never happened. Naomi came and sat beside her. Sometimes the worst moments plant the strongest seeds, and the way you handled it, that wasn't just maturity, it was movement. Imani thought for a moment. I didn't Planned to be an activist. You didn't have to, Naomi replied. You just told the truth, loud enough for people who've been quiet too long. That weekend, Imani was invited to speak, virtually, at a student leadership event. She sat in front of her laptop, wearing a clean white blouse and her hair in soft braids, just like her mom used to wear in college. The moderator smiled at her from the screen. Imani, if you could tell every young person watching one thing, what would it be? Imani didn't hesitate. Don't let someone's assumption become your limitation. Just because they don't. See, your value doesn't mean it's not there. If they try to take your space, your voice, your seat, you hold it anyway. The live stream chat exploded with hearts and fire emojis. One comment stood out. This isn't just a story anymore. It's a standard. Imani closed her laptop and sat in the quiet for a while. The moment on the plane had passed. The woman who tore her ticket was gone. The sky was calm again. But the story? It was still flying. Because when one girl refuses to be erased, she writes the future for all who follow. A few weeks later, Siat 2C wasn't just part of Imani's past. It had become a symbol, featured in news columns, policy documents, and even murals in schools. The image of a young black girl sitting tall in a plane seat she refused to give up was now etched into the collective consciousness. But while the headlines buzzed, Imani had found something deeper, a calling. She began speaking not just at student events, but at city forums, youth coalitions, and even live panels with adults twice her age. Not because she was chasing the spotlight, but because her voice made people listen. At one conference hosted by a National Diversity Foundation, she sat beside a U.S. senator, a civil rights attorney, and a tech CEO. At first, she felt out of place, until she started speaking. I wasn't trying to prove I belonged in first class. I was just trying to get home, but someone else's bias tried to decide for me. And instead of letting that moment silence me, I let it shape me. When she finished, the room erupted. Not out of politeness, but out of recognition. Because every person in that room had either been Imani or had failed to speak up when someone like her was pushed aside. Meanwhile, Naomi's internal initiative at Sky Connect had gone global. New slogans lined every terminal. Every passenger, every story, every seat counts. Respect isn't earned, it's required. Flight crews received bias training designed in collaboration with civil rights groups and educators. Airline partnerships with youth programs were launched in Imani's name. And on the newly launched Sky Connect Dreamliner 400, Seat 2C bore a small plaque in honor of Imani Davis, who reminded the world what belonging looks like. But not everyone was clapping. In online forums and comment threads, some voices pushed back. It was just a misunderstanding. This is overblown. She's a kid. Why are we turning this into a movement? Imani saw the comments. She didn't ignore them, but she didn't absorb them either. Instead, she addressed them on stage, in her writing, in conversation. I didn't make the moment big. The moment was already big. I just refused to shrink inside it. Her poise didn't come from performance. It came from being tired. Tired of people being told to sit down, stay quiet, or settle for less. And when she spoke with that kind of clarity, even skeptics started listening. At home one night, as she sat at the kitchen counter doing homework, Naomi walked in and set a letter on the table. "From the White House," she said casually. Imani looked up. "What?" She opened the envelope slowly. Inside was an invitation to the annual Youth Advocacy Gala in Washington, D.C., along with a personal note from the First Lady. "Dear Imani, your voice has not only inspired the nation, it has shifted the way we talk about justice, dignity, and identity. I'd be honored to meet the girl from Seat 2C. Sincerely, the First Lady." Imani's jaw dropped. Naomi smiled. "Still think this was just about a torn ticket?" Later that night, Imani stood by her bedroom window looking up at the night sky. Airplanes blinked in the distance, small, quiet, but steady. She wondered how many kids were flying tonight, how many were scared, how many were proud, how many were just trying to get from one place to another without being questioned, judged, or stopped. She couldn't speak to every child on every plane, but her story could. And as long as that story was still flying, so was she. Because belonging isn't given by gatekeepers. It's claimed by those brave enough to say, "I'm here and I'm not moving." By now, the name Imani Davis had reached places she'd never dreamed of: newsrooms, parliaments, school assemblies, and conference halls across the globe. But to Imani, she was still just herself, a 12-year-old girl who loved graphic novels, mango smoothies, and writing in her purple journal. Her life had changed, but at her core, she hadn't. Still, she couldn't walk into a bookstore or a school without someone whispering, "That's her, the girl from seat 2C. Some would ask for photos. Others would tearfully thank her. A few would stand silently, hand over heart, and just nod. Imani had learned that not every story needed words. Some people simply wanted to feel seen by someone who had been through it. And now she carried their stories too. One day, while visiting a charter school in Detroit, Imani gave a small talk in the library. A fifth-grade boy raised his hand shyly during the Q&A. What if I don't know how to speak up yet?" The room went quiet. All eyes on him. His voice trembled. Imani paused. Then she leaned forward and said, "Then start by listening to the voice inside you, the one that knows when something isn't fair. You don't have to shout. You just have to stay standing, or sitting, or writing, or even just not moving. Speaking up doesn't always look loud, but it always feels brave." The boy smiled for the first time that day. Back at home, Naomi watched her daughter with a kind of reverence. This wasn't about a single event anymore. This was a movement in motion, growing organically because it spoke to a universal ache, the ache of being underestimated. One evening, Naomi found Imani sitting on the porch steps, journal in her lap. "You've been quiet tonight," she said. "I was thinking about her," Imani replied softly. Naomi knew exactly who she meant. "The flight attendant?" "Yeah, Ms. Porter." Naomi sat beside her, surprised. "What about her?" "I wonder what she tells herself now. Does she think I was just a troublemaker? Or does she remember how she looked at me, like I was invisible? And does it haunt her a little?" Naomi didn't speak right away. Then she said gently, "Maybe. Or maybe not. But her story doesn't belong to you. Yours does. And you chose to write it with strength." Imani nodded, but her eyes stayed distant. "I don't hate her," she whispered. "But I don't forgive her either. Not yet. And I think that's okay." Naomi smiled, eyes shining. "That's more than okay. That's human." The next morning, an unexpected package arrived. Inside was a handwritten letter. The return address was unfamiliar. "Dear Imani, I've spent weeks watching your interviews and reading your words. You don't know me, but I know your story, because I'm the woman who once looked the other way when a child like you was mistreated on a flight I worked. And I swore I wouldn't stay silent again. You've helped me become braver, better, louder, for the right reasons. You didn't just hold your seat. You made space for people like me to finally stand up. With gratitude. A flight attendant who's still learning." Imani held the letter close to her chest for a moment. She didn't cry, but her eyes said enough. That evening, she updated the banner on her blog. The original title read, "Seat 2C, a story of being seen now." It said, "Seat 2C, for everyone who's ever been told to move." And below it, "You don't need permission. just presence. Because while one woman had tried to tear her ticket in half, Imani had taken that ripped paper and turned it into a platform, and now she wasn't just holding her seat. She was making sure no one else had to fight alone, to hold theirs. A year had passed since that flight. Imani Davis had grown taller, a little bolder, and a lot busier. But some things stayed the same. She still drank mango smoothies on Saturday mornings, still kept a stack of library books by her bed, and still carried her purple journal everywhere she went. But now, her name lived in more places than she ever expected. There was a scholarship in her honor, a TEDx talk that had reached over 2 million views, a classroom wall in South Africa with her quote, "You belong," before anyone gives you permission. And yet, Imani never let it go to her head, because what mattered most to her was still that moment, the ripped ticket, the disbelief, the silence that nearly swallowed her, and the choice she made to stay seated when someone tried to push her out. One sunny spring afternoon, Naomi and Imani boarded a brand new SkyConnect aircraft, but this time, they weren't passengers. They were guests of honor. The airline had invited them to unveil the redesigned first-class cabin of the Dreamliner 500, an initiative born from Imani's story. The head of public affairs stood near the jet bridge, holding a velvet cloth over one of the seats. "This," she said to a crowd of press and flight staff, "is more than a dedication. It's a promise that no child, no person will ever have to justify their presence in a space they've rightfully earned." Then she turned to Imani. "Would you do the honors?" Imani stepped forward, hands a little shaky, heart pounding in her chest. She pulled the cloth away slowly, revealing the polished brass plaque on Seat 2C, in honor of Imani Davis. She didn't move, so the world did. Gasps filled the cabin. Some people clapped, others wiped their eyes. Imani stood, still hand over her mouth, speechless. Naomi leaned over and whispered, "That's your name, your legacy." But Imani shook her head. "It's not just mine," she whispered. "It's for everyone who's been pushed aside, who's been told to leave quietly, who never got their seat back." She paused, her voice steadier now. "This is a seat for every story that never made the news, for every kid who swallowed their voice, and for every moment someone thought silence was safer than dignity." That night, back home, Imani sat on her bedroom floor surrounded by letters, hundreds of them, some from teachers, others from strangers, many from children. One read, "I stood up when my friend got picked on for her accent. I told the teacher, 'That's not okay. I wouldn't have done that if I hadn't heard your story.' Another said, 'I didn't move to the back of the classroom like he told me to. I said, 'I belong here.'" And he didn't know what to say after that. Imani closed her eyes. Her heart was full, heavy, and light all at once. The next morning, her blog received one final message that made her stop. "I'm Ms. Porter. I've been watching from afar. I resigned. I've been in therapy. I wanted to say, I'm sorry. Not because I got caught, but because you deserved better. Thank you for holding your seat, because it helped me finally face my own reflection." Imani sat quietly for a long time. Then she clicked, reply. Not to forgive, not to forget, but to acknowledge something simple. Healing starts with truth, and we all have a seat in that process too. She closed her laptop, picked up her journal, and on a fresh page wrote, "I didn't ask for this moment, but I honored it. And now it belongs to more than just me. Because when a 12-year-old girl refused to be moved, she shifted the sky, and seat 2C, it would never be just a seat again. It was a legacy, a movement, a map for every voice still finding the courage to speak. The seat stayed, So did she. And now, so will her story.